The response from my last video was way better than expected. So I'd like to continue to answer some of the most common questions that I get about ice climbing competitions. Today I'd like to focus on equipment. Now, if you didn't catch that last video, you can see it on my athlete page on Facebook or on my YouTube channel. So before we get into some of the more specialized equipment, we're going to need a helmet and a climbing harness. Now, let's talk about ice axes. Ice axes are generally split into two groups, with mountaineering axes and climbing axes, which are referred to as climbing tools or ice tools. The axes that we use for competition are just modified climbing tools. But we also have the notorious ice fifi, which are uniquely shaped and extremely sharp to allow for better hooking during speed climbing competitions. Now, anyone familiar with my speed climbing career will be quick to tell you that ice fifis, when used incorrectly, can be quite dangerous. Comparing these two tools, we'll probably find more differences than similarities. This tool is designed for pure ice climbing, whereas this tool is optimized for elite level competition style climbing. And one of the most common comments I see floating around there has to do with the size and shape of competition tools, often followed by a derogatory statement about competition climbers cheating with extended tools, when in fact the UIAA restricts the size of tools with a literal box that all tools have to fit into to be legal for competition. The standard Petzl is actually one of the most common tools used in competition. Now, the tool that I have here from Krukonogi maximizes the size of the new box, which was recently reduced by 5 centimeters in both length and width. I'll show you a few different varieties of tools in a second here. Tools designed for mixed climbing will have an offset upper handle, which reduces the amount of pick shift that occurs when changing positions of the tool. You can also see that this tool has a rather large extended pommel, which gives me a few more options when changing the position of my hands. You'll notice that I've taped the handles of my tools. There are several different ways of doing this, but the method that I like the best is by using the inner tube from a bicycle tire and cutting into thin strips that I then fasten onto the tool with hockey tape. Now, I'll get into how exactly to do this in a video later on. The next thing you're going to need is a boot and a crampon. Now, this is the setup that I use when climbing in the mountains, as it is a rigid B3 style mountaineering boot with an aggressive monopoint climbing crampon. Now, in competitions, we're going to use something called a fruit boot, which is a boot with a bolt-on crampon. The setup here utilizes dual horizontal front points for better purchase and stability when speed climbing. This is the boot that I use for lead climbing competitions. It has a carbon fiber sole for better stability while cutting weight, and a rubberized heel to allow for better heel hooking. You may have noticed that the crampons on my lead climbing setup are drastically different from the other two types of crampons. I actually have two types of crampons for competition depending on the structure and the type of route. Now, for routes that have a lot of ice, I'll generally use these crampons. The additional points provide a bit more stability in the ice, as well as giving me a few more options for hooking onto hanging elements. However, I have noticed that these extra points can get in the way and get tangled in the rope when doing a lot of figure 4s and figure 9s. I've also noticed that these additional points up here can limit my angle of attack when kicking into plywood. So for routes with a lot of plywood, I'll use these crampons, which are streamlined to better penetrate into plywood with very little volume, so you can move around a lot without risking your foot placements popping. The last bit of equipment is by far the most overlooked when discussing equipment for ice climbing competitions, and that is gloves. Now, ice climbing can be cold, and it can take us to some pretty cold locations, so you'd think that we would want big, burly, warm gloves, when in reality, we use golf gloves. Now, golf gloves are by far the best for dry tooling and mixed climbing. Since they're so thin, they provide better dexterity and control of our tool while we're climbing. A lot of climbers will go the extra step of using liquid chalk on their hands before to avoid the gloves slipping when we climb. I'll try to provide a link for all of the companies that I mentioned in this video, but for now, thanks for watching.